The patrol ship Vanguard drifted through the void, its sleek frame camouflaged against the velvet darkness of space. The faint hum of its engines was a whisper in the vast expanse, nearly swallowed by the cold silence of the frontier. Starlight cast a pale glow on its polished hull, but it was a fragile light, dwarfed by the infinite, unfeeling black. Inside the bridge, Officer Darren Vallis leaned over his console, the soft glow of the scanner screen washing his face in an eerie green. His fingers, calloused from years of routine checks and monotonous work, tapped against the edge of the console, drumming out a rhythm born of boredom. Border Patrol was the graveyard shift of the Galactic Council's fleet. Hours spent staring at nothing, surrounded by silence so thick it pressed against your skull. He yawned, the sound breaking the brittle quiet, and shook his head. "Stay awake, Darren. Just one more hour." The thought had barely taken root when his scanner emitted a sharp, jarring beep. His fingers froze mid-tap. Beep, beep, beep. The sound escalated, rapid and insistent. Darren straightened in his chair, his breath quickening. He adjusted the settings, blinking against the sudden surge of data. The screen was alive now, dots materializing in a slow but steady cascade. "Captain Myris," he called, his voice tinged with unease. "I've got something here. Unidentified signatures. Multiples." Captain Helena Myris, a tall woman with graying hair tied in a severe knot, strode over from her command post. Her boots clicked sharply against the metal deck, the sound slicing through the tension in the air. "Show me." Darren enlarged the display. A field of blips painted the screen, scattered like the first drops of a storm. "They just appeared, ma'am, out of nowhere." Myris's sharp eyes narrowed. "That's not possible. Nothing just appears." Her tone was ice, but her hands moved with precision, pulling up additional readings. The ship's AI began to hum faintly as it worked to analyze the data. "Energy signatures are odd," Darren muttered, his voice low, as if the act of speaking might summon whatever those blips represented. "These don't match any known council vessels. No registered species. It's like ghosts," Myris finished for him, her voice barely above a whisper. The blips multiplied, spreading across the scanner like ink in water. The Vanguard's AI chimed in. "Analysis inconclusive. Energy readings highly anomalous. Recommend heightened alert status." "Helm, bring us to full readiness," Myris ordered. The lights on the bridge dimmed as red alert strobes bathed the crew in ominous crimson. A low rumble vibrated through the floor as shields powered up and weapon systems began to stir. "Captain," Darren said, his voice cracking slightly, "they're forming something." The display shifted as the blips moved with uncanny precision. They weren't aimless. They were aligning, stretching across the edges of the scanner range in a pattern too deliberate to be random. A formation, a massive one. "Long-range cameras now," Myris barked. The main view screen flickered, pixelating before resolving into clarity. Darren felt the blood drain from his face. Against the backdrop of distant stars, sleek, black ships emerged from the void. They glided like predators, their hulls glinting with faint blue lines that pulsed rhythmically, like a heartbeat. Darren's stomach twisted. These weren't ships. They were shadows carved from nightmares, silent harbingers of something ancient and vengeful. And then he saw the emblem, stark white against the obsidian hulls, the unmistakable outline of Earth's continents, encircled by a constellation of stars. Darren's throat went dry. "Captain," he croaked, "that symbol—" Myris stepped closer, her face pale as frost, her eyes locked on the screen. The bridge was silent now, every officer frozen as if the air itself had thickened, suffocating them. "That symbol hasn't been seen in 3,000 years, Myris said, her voice a ghostly echo. "It's impossible." Darren's hand trembled as he brought up the archives. The computer processed her command, pulling up an ancient file. The room dimmed further as a hologram flickered to life, showing a familiar symbol etched into the historical records. Earth, humanity. 3,000 years ago, Myris continued, her voice soft but taut. "The Council erased them. A species deemed too dangerous, too unpredictable. Their planet was shattered. Nothing survived. But," Darren's voice faltered, "what if we were wrong? What if—" He didn't finish. The Vanguard's comms console blared to life, demanding attention. A transmission request from the fleet now looming on their scanners. Myris stared at the alert, her hand hovering over the button. The bridge was so silent they could hear the faint hiss of the ship's life support systems. "Do we answer?" Darren asked, his voice small. Myris swallowed hard, then nodded. Her finger pressed the button. The screen shifted, and a face appeared. A human face. The man was older, his hair streaked with silver, his eyes cold and piercing. He wore a uniform of stark black with silver accents that gleamed in the dim light. "This is Captain Aiden Kerr of the Vindication, flagship of the human fleet," the man said, his voice calm, yet laced with an undercurrent of authority that sent chills down Darren's spine. "To the Galactic Council forces, your presence is noted. We have no intention of engaging, unless provoked." Myris took a steadying breath, squaring her shoulders. "Captain Kerr, humanity was destroyed 3,000 years ago. This must be some kind of— "Some kind of what?" Aiden interrupted, his tone cutting. "A trick? A ghost story brought to life? No, Captain. We are very much alive, and we have returned." "For what?" Myris demanded, her composure cracking under the weight of his words. Aiden leaned closer to the screen, his gaze unflinching. "To finish what the Council started, to show you the consequences of your choices." Behind him, Darren could see the bridge of the Vindication, bustling with activity. Tactical officers manned consoles lit by displays far more advanced than anything the Council had ever conceived. It was a cathedral of power and purpose, every detail designed for one thing: war. Aiden's gaze didn't waver. "You have one job, Captain. Deliver a message. Tell your Council that humanity remembers. We have spent 3 millennia preparing for this day." The transmission cut abruptly, leaving the bridge in stunned silence. Myris stood motionless, her hand gripping the console so tightly her knuckles turned white. Darren exhaled shakily. "What do we do, Captain?" Myris turned to him, her face unreadable. "We do what they said. We send the message." The Vanguard pivoted, its engines flaring to life as it sped back toward Council space. Behind them, the human fleet remained still, a silent storm gathering on the edges of the galaxy, its purpose clear. For 3,000 years, humanity had been a ghost, whispered about in the darkest corridors of history. Now they were something else entirely. They were a reckoning. The Vanguard sped through the void like a hunted animal, its engines burning hotter than regulations allowed. Captain Helena Myris gripped the armrests of her command chair, her mind churning through the events of the past hour. She stared out the viewport as streaks of starlight blurred by, her reflection in the glass a pale ghost. The message had been sent. The Council now knew what she had seen, what she had heard. Yet the weight of it lingered, pressing against her chest like the cold vacuum outside. Myris couldn't shake the face of Captain Aiden Kerr. His voice had not been raised in anger, nor edged with desperation. It had been the voice of a man who held all the cards and knew it. "Captain," Darren Vallis said from his console, his voice trembling, "the fleet, they're still there, just sitting." "Of course they are," she murmured, her voice more brittle than she intended. She straightened and addressed the bridge crew. "We have one priority: reach the capital and warn the Council. The humans may not have fired on us, but make no mistake, they didn't come all this way for diplomacy." The bridge lights flickered as the Vanguard pushed its engines to the limit, leaving the looming human fleet far behind. Myris closed her eyes for a brief moment, trying to banish the image of those black ships, their glowing veins of blue like living scars across the fabric of space. It was a fleet built for vengeance, a silent promise carved into metal. Deep within the command deck of the Vindication, Aiden Kerr stood before a massive tactical display, his arms folded tightly across his chest. The hologram pulsed with faint blue light, outlining the positions of every ship under his command. Hundreds of vessels, each one forged in the crucible of exile, hovered on the periphery of the Galactic Council's borders like predators, waiting for the right moment to strike. He exhaled slowly, the faint scent of metallic coolant and ionized air filling his lungs. His crew worked in near silence, the hum of machinery and the rhythmic tapping of consoles their only accompaniment. The weight of history pressed on them all. Captain, his second-in-command, Lieutenant Kira Hale, approached, her boots clicking softly against the deck. She carried a data pad, its screen glowing faintly in the dim light. Our reconnaissance drones have returned. Preliminary scans of the Council's central systems are complete. Aiden turned to her, his sharp features cast in shadows by the glowing map. And? Kira hesitated, her brow furrowed. Their defenses are stronger than anticipated. Shields layered across multiple planetary systems, overlapping fleets, automated weapon platforms. It's not insurmountable, but it won't be easy. Aiden let out a dry chuckle, the sound devoid of humor. Nothing about this ever was. Kira's lips pressed into a thin line. We've spent 3,000 years planning for this moment, Aiden. She paused, searching for the right words. We can't afford mistakes. Not now. Aiden took the data pad from her, his gaze flicking over the detailed schematics. There won't be mistakes, he said quietly, his voice like tempered steel. Every one of these systems was built on the assumption that humanity was extinct. They designed their defenses for a galaxy without us. Kira nodded, though her eyes lingered on him for a moment longer. She recognized the tension in his posture, the way his hands tightened imperceptibly when he spoke. Aiden carried the weight of not just their fleet, but their entire species. The legacy of Earth hung around his neck like a millstone. Begin Phase 1, he ordered. Target their communications first. Isolate their systems. Divide them. Then we move. Kira nodded again and stepped away, her voice echoing commands to the tactical crew. Aiden remained still, staring at the hologram. The map shimmered, the Council's strongholds glowing faintly, unaware of the storm about to descend. In the quiet of the command deck, Aiden spoke softly to no one in particular. We didn't survive 3,000 years just to become what they feared, but they'll learn. They'll learn what we've become. On Capital Prime, the heart of the Galactic Council, the skies were a mosaic of swirling ships, their hulls gleaming under the pale light of the system's twin suns. The air was thick with the scent of metal and ozone, a symphony of exhaust trails and energy pulses painting the atmosphere. The great hall of the Council stood tall and imposing, its spires piercing the heavens like accusing fingers. Inside, chaos reigned. What do you mean they're human? High Chancellor Eric Solon barked, his voice echoing across the marble chamber. His crimson robes flowed around him as he paced, his movements erratic. Humanity was eradicated. It's impossible. Captain Myra stood at attention before the gathered council, her face pale but resolute. I saw them with my own eyes, Chancellor. They are human, and their fleet is unlike anything we've ever encountered. The chamber buzzed with murmurs, the assembled representatives shifting uneasily in their seats. Myris could feel the weight of their skepticism, their disbelief clinging to her like a second skin. And what did they say? Solon pressed, his gaze sharp and unrelenting. Myris hesitated. The memory of Aiden Kerr's voice replayed in her mind, clear and unwavering. They said they've returned to show us the consequences of our actions. A ripple of unease spread through the room. Solon stopped pacing, his hands gripping the edge of his podium. This council acted in the interest of galactic peace when it eradicated humanity. If they have somehow survived, we will deal with them. How? A voice rang out from the chamber. General Vinar Kalos, a towering figure clad in the dark uniform of the council's military, stepped forward. His reptilian scales gleamed under the chamber lights, his golden eyes narrowing. If what Captain Myris says is true, their technology far surpasses ours. We need to mobilize the fleet immediately. Another representative, Daxa Errol, raised her tentacled appendages in protest. And risk provoking them further? Number diplomacy must be our first option. We can't face an enemy we don't understand. Kalos snarled, his fangs flashing. Diplomacy won't save us if their ships are already on our doorstep. The arguments rose, a cacophony of voices clashing like blades. Myra stood silently, the storm of their words swirling around her. She thought of the fleet she had seen, of the calm menace in Kerr's eyes. Diplomacy? Military strength? She doubted either would be enough. High above the council chamber, hidden cameras recorded every moment. On a secure channel, the feed was being intercepted by a cloaked human reconnaissance drone. Back aboard the Vindication, Aiden Kerr watched the council squabbling with grim satisfaction. "They have no idea what's coming," Kira said, standing beside him. "They don't need to," Aiden replied, his tone cold. "Not yet." The council's indecision played out like a drama, each scene adding another piece to humanity's growing advantage. Aiden's fingers hovered over the controls of the holographic map. His eyes narrowed as he focused on the capital's defenses. "Begin Phase 2, he said softly. His voice carried the weight of 3,000 years of silence. And just like that, the storm began to gather speed. The council chamber was in chaos. Shadows cast by the high marble arches flickered wildly as the light from overhead panels pulsed in warning, a silent testament to the escalating crisis. The scent of heated electronics and ozone hung in the air, mingling with the collective anxiety of the gathered representatives. Voices clashed, their heated arguments ricocheting off the polished walls. High Chancellor Eric Solon raised his hand for silence, but his authority no longer commanded the room. His pale complexion betrayed the turmoil beneath his stoic mask. "Enough!" he bellowed, his voice cracking through the din like thunder. Slowly the representatives quieted, though the tension remained thick as a storm cloud ready to burst. "Every moment we waste debating, we give them time to advance," snarled General Vinar Kalos, his scaled knuckles rapping against the council table. His golden eyes burned with barely contained fury. "This fleet isn't just a threat. It's a declaration of war. If we do not act, they will obliterate us." "And what would you suggest, General?" Daxa Errol's voice was sharp and cold, her tentacles coiling defensively. "They dismantled your intercept fleet without firing a single shot. They could have destroyed us already, but they haven't. Why provoke them further?" Kalos's claws dug into the tabletop, scoring the polished surface. "Because they will strike. They're testing us, probing for weaknesses. I won't sit idly while humanity decides the fate of this council." Myra stood silently in the corner, her pulse thrumming in her ears. She replayed Aiden Kerr's words over and over in her mind. He had been calm, too calm. It was the confidence of a man who already knew the outcome. "High Chancellor," she said, stepping forward. Her voice cut through the argument like a knife. "They're not here to negotiate. Whatever message they're sending, they want us to see them as inevitable. We must assume they have resources and strategies far beyond what we can counter." Solon's gaze locked on her, searching for answers she didn't have. "Then what is their purpose, Captain? Revenge? Domination?" Miris hesitated, her throat dry. "Perhaps it's something worse. Perhaps they mean to unmake the council itself." The room fell silent, the weight of her words settling like ash on the air. On the bridge of the Vindication, Aiden Kerr studied the holographic display before him. His eyes were sharp, calculating, as they moved across the map of council-controlled space. Each glowing dot represented a system, a fortress, a target. He could almost feel the hum of the ship beneath his boots, the latent power coursing through its systems. Kira Hale approached, datapad in hand. Her expression was neutral, but there was tension in the set of her jaw. "Phase 2 operations are underway. Communications disruption is already fragmenting their network. We've intercepted over 200 council signals in the last hour. Most are uncoordinated requests for reinforcements. They're panicking." Aiden nodded. "Good. But panic can be dangerous. Have our decoy fleets move into position and ensure we maintain control over the flow of information." Kira hesitated for a moment before continuing. "The Council's military leadership is mobilizing their secret assets, hidden weapon platforms, unregistered fleets. They're throwing everything into this." Aiden's lips curled into a faint, humorless smile. Desperation, They've spent millennia preparing for a hypothetical threat. What they don't realize is that their contingency plans are built on assumptions about an enemy they thought they understood. Kira tilted her head slightly. And do they? No, he said, his tone colder than the void outside. They're fighting ghosts of the past. What we've become is beyond their imagination. The holographic display shifted, zooming in on a heavily fortified council world. Orbital platforms bristling with weapons surrounded the planet like a steel crown. Kira frowned. That's Nexar 7, one of their primary military hubs. What are your orders? Aiden studied the image for a moment, his thoughts veiled. We won't attack it. Not yet. Let them believe we're focused elsewhere. When we move, it'll be at a time and place of our choosing. The faint sound of footsteps interrupted them. A young officer approached, his expression uncertain. Sir, we've received a signal, unencrypted. It's from Capital Prime. Aiden turned to him, his brows furrowing. Put it through. The bridge dimmed as a holographic figure appeared. High Chancellor Solon stood rigid, his face a mask of authority, though his eyes betrayed his unease. To the commander of the human fleet, Solon began, his voice steady despite the crackling transmission. You claim to represent a people long thought extinct. I demand you explain your presence here and your intentions. Aiden's gaze didn't waver. We've already told you our purpose, Chancellor. Humanity has returned to remind you of the cost of your choices. And what is it you want? Solon pressed. Revenge? The destruction of our civilization? Aiden's silence stretched just long enough to unnerve the bridge crew before he finally spoke. What we want is justice, but justice has many forms. For now, consider this a demonstration. The transmission ended abruptly. Solon's hologram flickered and vanished, leaving the bridge in shadow once more. Kira turned to Aiden, her expression unreadable. What's next? Aiden's voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of conviction. Next, we show them what it means to face the consequences of fear. In a classified council facility buried beneath a mountain on Nexar 7, General Kalos stood in the heart of the war room. The air was thick with the scent of recycled oxygen and burning circuitry as technicians scrambled to decode the fragmented intelligence flowing in from across council space. Screens displayed maps, sensor readouts, and grim reports. They're disrupting everything, a technician stammered, his hands trembling over his console. We can't get a clear picture of their movements. Every time we establish a connection, they cut it off. Kalos snarled, his claws raking across the edge of a console. Then stop reacting. Predict. Where will they strike next? A nearby officer hesitated. Sir, their tactics don't align with anything we've seen before. They're not attacking our population centers or declaring war zones. They're dismantling us. Kalos's growl deepened. Cowards, he spat. They think they can win by breaking our infrastructure. I'll show them the strength of the Council. He turned to an aide. Activate the Nexus fleet. Deploy the Black Vanguard. I want every asset in play. If these humans think they can outmaneuver us, they'll learn the price of underestimating the Council. The aide hesitated. General, if we deploy everything, we risk... Kira Hale approached, datapad in hand. Her expression was neutral, but there was tension in the set of her jaw. Phase 2 operations are underway. Communications disruption is already fragmenting their network. We've intercepted over 200 Council signals in the last hour. Most are uncoordinated requests for reinforcements. They're panicking. Aiden nodded. Good. But panic can be dangerous. Have our decoy fleets move into position and ensure we maintain control over the flow of information. Kira hesitated for a moment before continuing. The Council's military leadership is mobilizing their secret assets. Hidden weapon platforms, unregistered fleets. They're throwing everything into this. Aiden's lips curled into a faint, humorless smile. Desperation. They've spent millennia preparing for a hypothetical threat. What they don't realize is that their contingency plans are built on assumptions about an enemy they thought they understood. Kira tilted her head slightly. And do they? No, he said, his tone colder than the void outside. "They're fighting ghosts of the past. What we've become is beyond their imagination." The holographic display shifted, zooming in on a heavily fortified council world. Orbital platforms bristling with weapons surrounded the planet like a steel crown. Kira frowned. "That's Nexar 7, one of their primary military hubs. What are your orders?" Aiden studied the image for a moment, his thoughts veiled. "We won't attack it. Not yet. Let them believe we're focused elsewhere. When we move, it'll be at a time and place of our choosing." The faint sound of footsteps interrupted them. A young officer approached, his expression uncertain. "Sir, we've received a signal, unencrypted. It's from Capital Prime." Aiden turned to him, his brows furrowing. "Put it through." The bridge dimmed as a holographic figure appeared. High Chancellor Solon stood rigid, his face a mask of authority, though his eyes betrayed his unease. "To the commander of the human fleet," Solon began, his voice steady despite the crackling transmission. "You claim to represent a people long thought extinct. I demand you explain your presence here and your intentions." Aiden's gaze didn't waver. "We've already told you our purpose, Chancellor. Humanity has returned to remind you of the cost of your choices." "And what is it you want?" Solon pressed. "Revenge? The destruction of our civilization?" Aiden's silence stretched just long enough to unnerve the bridge crew before he finally spoke. "What we want is justice. But justice has many forms. For now, consider this a demonstration." The transmission ended abruptly. Solon's hologram flickered and vanished, leaving the bridge in shadow once more. Kira turned to Aiden, her expression unreadable. "What's next?" Aiden's voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of conviction. "Next, we show them what it means to face the consequences of fear." In a classified council facility buried beneath a mountain on Nexar 7, General Kalos stood in the heart of the war room. The air was thick with the scent of recycled oxygen and burning circuitry as technicians scrambled to decode the fragmented intelligence flowing in from across council space. Screens displayed maps, sensor readouts, and grim reports. "They're disrupting everything," a technician stammered, his hands trembling over his console. "We can't get a clear picture of their movements. Every time we establish a connection, they cut it off." Kalos snarled, his claws raking across the edge of a console. "Then stop reacting. Predict. Where will they strike next?" A nearby officer hesitated. "Sir, their tactics don't align with anything we've seen before. They're not attacking our population centers or declaring war zones. They're dismantling us." Kalos's growl deepened. "Cowards," he spat. "They think they can win by breaking our infrastructure. I'll show them the strength of the Council." He turned to an aide. "Activate the Nexus fleet. Deploy the Black Vanguard. I want every asset in play. If these humans think they can outmaneuver us, they'll learn the price of underestimating the Council." The aide hesitated. "General, if we deploy everything, we risk—" "Do it!" Kalos roared, his voice echoing through the chamber. "Or I'll find someone who will." As the orders went out, a sense of foreboding settled over the war room. The screens flickered, briefly showing static before stabilizing. Kalos clenched his fists, his claws digging into his palms. The humans had stirred a beast they couldn't control. Or so he believed. Far above Nexar 7, hidden in the shadow of an asteroid field, a lone human reconnaissance drone observed silently. Its sleek black form glimmered faintly as it transmitted every detail back to the Vindication. Aiden Kerr watched the data feed with an unyielding gaze. "They're preparing for war," he said softly, more to himself than to anyone else. "Then they'll be ready to lose," Kira replied. Aiden didn't answer. His focus remained on the hologram, his thoughts veiled. He had seen the Council's desperation, their blind arrogance, and he knew they were playing directly into his hands. The storm wasn't coming. It was already here. In the cold silence of space, the Galactic Council's Nexus fleet assembled near Nexar 7, its warships gleaming like serrated blades under the pale light of a distant star. The vacuum was alive with the barely perceptible hum of massive engines, shield generators casting faint ripples across their vessels. Each ship was a testament to the Council's supremacy. Bristling with weaponry designed to crush insurrections and enforce dominance, it was a fleet built to intimidate, to conquer. But now, it waited. General Vinar Kalos stood on the command bridge of the Ecliptica, the Nexus fleet's flagship. The air inside was heavy with tension, the sharp tang of coolant and machine oil filling the space. Technicians and officers moved with practiced urgency, their voices low, their gazes flickering nervously between the glowing tactical displays and the vast expanse of space outside the viewport. "Report," Kalos growled, his voice cutting through the quiet like a blade. A tactical officer turned, her scales glinting in the artificial light. "Our sensors are still blind to their exact position, General. Their interference has scrambled our long-range scans. But based on intercepted fragments, we believe they're coordinating for a strike on one of our core systems." Kalos's golden eyes narrowed, his clawed hand tapping rhythmically on the edge of his console. "Fools," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "They underestimate us." But even as he spoke the words, doubt gnawed at the edges of his confidence. The humans had dismantled 2 auxiliary fleets in the past hour with surgical precision. No casualties, no debris fields, just silence where once there had been ships. The air seemed to thicken, the weight of anticipation pressing down on every soul aboard. Somewhere out there, in the vast darkness, humanity waited. On the bridge of the Vindication, Aiden Kerr studied the Nexus fleet's formation, displayed as a shimmering hologram that filled the central console. His expression was calm, almost serene, but his mind was a tempest of calculations and contingencies. The faint scent of ozone hung in the air, mingling with the subtle vibration of the ship's reactors. Every detail mattered now. "They're overcommitted," Kira Hale observed, standing at his side. Her sharp eyes traced the glowing fleet markers. "Nexar 7 is heavily fortified, but they've left critical systems vulnerable. Their logistical hubs, communication relays, they're exposed." "By design," Aiden replied, his voice measured. "Kalos is counting on us to take the bait. He wants us to attack Nexar 7 head-on, to waste our strength against his strongest defenses. But we're not here to win battles. We're here to dismantle their ability to fight." Kira nodded, her lips pressing into a tight line. "Then we proceed with Phase 3? Aiden's gaze flicked to the timer running in the corner of the display. "Yes, deploy the singularity blades." Kira's fingers moved over her console, issuing the command. Across the fleet, cloaked vessels activated, their matte black hulls rendering them invisible to even the most advanced sensors. Each carried a payload unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Artificial singularities, stabilized and weaponized for precise destruction. "Targets confirmed," Kira reported. "Primary focus, logistical depots and deep space relays. Secondary, orbital platforms and secondary defense grids." "Execute," Aiden said simply, his tone carrying the weight of inevitability. The first sign of the attack came as a whisper. On Nexar 7, the logistics officers overseeing supply lines watched in horror as their readouts began to vanish. Entire cargo routes disappeared, their freighters swallowed by shadows before they could send distress signals. Orbital relays sparked and died, plunging vast sectors of space into darkness. Communication hubs blinked out one by one, their systems shredded by forces they couldn't comprehend. Kalos stared at the tactical display aboard the Ecliptica, his jaw tightening as the chaos unfolded. "What in the void is happening?" he demanded, his voice a snarl of frustration. A technician's hands flew over her console, her movements frantic. "General, we're losing contact with our support fleets. Multiple logistical hubs have gone dark. It's as if—" She didn't finish. The room shuddered violently, the deck beneath them groaning as if the ship itself were in pain. Alarms blared, the harsh red lights painting the bridge in hues of blood. "Report!" Kalos roared. "An energy anomaly, General," another officer shouted, his voice laced with panic. "It's collapsing our external systems. Shields are holding, but barely." Kalos bared his teeth. "Deploy all fighters. I want every available ship on high alert." The Ecliptica's hangar bays roared to life, fighters screaming out into the void like a swarm of hornets. But the enemy wasn't there, not in any way they could see. In the darkness of space, the singularity blades did their work. Invisible to the naked eye, the artificial singularities lanced through the Council's defenses, collapsing shield generators, disabling propulsion systems, and leaving vast ships helpless. But the humans didn't destroy them outright. No explosions marred the stars, no debris fields littered the void. Instead, the Council's fleets were methodically neutralized, rendered powerless, without ever seeing their attackers. Aiden watched the results unfold in real time. His expression betrayed no satisfaction, only grim purpose. "Their strength lies in their arrogance," he murmured. "They built a fortress without realizing they were caging themselves in." Kira stood beside him, her gaze unwavering. "The singularity blades have completed their runs. The primary grid around Nexar 7 is offline. Secondary systems are failing." "Good," Aiden replied. "Now we take their heart." On Nexar 7, the ground trembled as humanity's next move became clear. High above the planet, massive human transport ships emerged from Cloak, their hulls dark and gleaming. They moved with terrifying precision, descending toward the orbital platforms like vultures circling their prey. From the ecliptic, Akelos watched, his claws digging into the arms of his chair. "They're stealing our installations," he growled. "They're dismantling our fleet piece by piece." The realization settled over him like a crushing weight. This wasn't just a war, it was an erasure. As the humans' precision strikes continued, panic rippled through the Council's ranks. Officers shouted conflicting orders, their voices rising in desperation. Kalos slammed his fist onto the console, silencing them. "Prepare the phase array," he ordered, his voice low and dangerous. "But General—" "Do it!" Kalos snapped. "We'll obliterate them in one strike." Deep within Nexar 7's core, the phase array began to power up, its reactors glowing with a sinister light. The weapon was a relic of the Council's darkest days, designed to tear through planetary defenses and obliterate entire fleets in a single cataclysmic burst. But aboard the Vindication, Aiden was already watching. "Kira," he said softly, "disable it." She nodded, her fingers dancing over the controls. The Vindication systems hummed in response, and a focused pulse of energy rippled outward. It found its target, latching onto the phase array's energy matrix with surgical precision. On Nexar 7, the weapon sputtered and died, its glow fading to nothing. In the heart of the chaos, Kalos stared at the blank screens, his chest heaving with rage. For the first time in his long career, he felt powerless. Aboard the Vindication, Aiden Kerr stood in silence, watching as the Council's mighty Nexus fleet crumbled. He knew this was only the beginning. Humanity had dismantled their infrastructure, neutralized their fleets, and rendered their strongest weapons useless. But the Council's true strength lay not in its ships or weapons, but in its hubris. And that, too, would fall. "Begin Phase 4, Aiden said, his voice steady. "It's time to make them see what they tried to destroy." As the Vindication surged forward, the stars seemed to shimmer in its wake, a silent promise of what was yet to come. The Vindication loomed above Nexar 7, its black hull absorbing the faint light of the system's star. Around it, the remnants of the Galactic Council's once mighty fleet drifted, powerless and silent. Below, on the surface of the planet, chaos reigned as the Council scrambled to comprehend the impossible. Their communications were severed, their weapons disarmed, and their fleets dismantled with precision that bordered on surgical. The weight of inevitability pressed down on them like an unseen hand. Aiden Kerr stood on the command bridge, his presence a steady anchor in the storm. The faint hum of the ship's systems resonated in the air, underscoring the gravity of the moment. The tactical display before him showed every critical installation on Nexar 7, now rendered inert. Kira Hale stood at his side, her expression calm but resolute. "They're preparing their last move," she said softly, her voice cutting through the stillness. "Reports from our recon teams indicate that the Elders are gathering in their bunker beneath Mount Eternus." Aiden's jaw tightened, his gaze fixed on the display. The same elders who ordered Earth's destruction. His words carried the weight of 3,000 years of exile, grief, and preparation. It always comes back to them. Kira hesitated for a moment, then spoke with quiet determination. This is it, Aiden. The final piece. After this, there's no going back. There was no going back the moment Earth turned to ash, he replied, his voice hard but steady. Begin the descent. Deep beneath Mount Eternus, the air was thick with the acrid tang of stale oxygen and heated circuitry. The elders, 12 figures clad in flowing robes that seemed to shimmer unnaturally, stood around a circular chamber, their faces pale and drawn. The low hum of the mountain's ancient defense systems vibrated beneath their feet, though the faint tremors from above betrayed their impending failure. They've dismantled everything, First Elder Corvin muttered, his voice trembling with frustration. Our fleets, our platforms, even our planetary defenses. It's as if they know our every move before we make it. They do know, Second Elder Rice said bitterly, his artificial eyes glowing faintly. 3,000 years we spent shaping the galaxy to ensure our control. And now they've turned our own strategies against us. Third Elder Sarah stepped forward, her voice sharp. Enough. We cannot cower like frightened hatchlings. The phase array may be disabled, but we still have the quantum annihilator. We can erase them in a single stroke. Fools, came a voice from the shadows. The elders turned as Fourth Elder Myron stepped into the dim light, her face etched with disdain. Do you not understand? They're not here to conquer us. They're here to end us. Before another word could be spoken, the chamber lights flickered and the low hum of the defense systems faded into silence. The tremors ceased. The elders froze, their faces etched with a mixture of fear and disbelief. They're here, Corvin whispered. The heavy blast doors of the bunker groaned as they slid open, the sound reverberating through the chamber like the toll of a bell. Beyond the threshold, shadowed figures emerged, their forms clad in black armor that pulsed with faint lines of blue light. The human soldiers moved with eerie precision, their boots echoing on the polished floor. And then, at the center of them, Aiden Kerr stepped forward. He was a stark contrast to the elders. No shimmering robes, no artificial enhancements, just a man forged by the weight of history and the will of a species that refused to die. His eyes were cold and steady, his expression unreadable. The elders stood silent, their power reduced to nothing by the man before them. You know why I'm here, Aiden said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of 1,000 lifetimes. You've known this moment was coming ever since the day you condemned Earth to die. Corvin found his voice, though it shook with fear. We did what was necessary. Humanity was advancing too quickly. You were a threat to the balance of the galaxy. Aiden's gaze didn't waver. You destroyed a world because you feared what we might become. You called it balance. I call it cowardice. Rice stepped forward, his voice rising in desperation. You've had your revenge. You've dismantled our fleets, taken our defenses. What more do you want? Justice, Aiden replied simply. The room fell silent. The word hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Aiden took a step closer, his armor glinting faintly in the dim light. You didn't just destroy Earth, he continued, his voice a low growl. You destroyed the chance for what we could have been. You feared our potential, so you turned us into something to fear. But we are not here to become you. We are here to ensure you can never do this again. The elders looked at one another, their carefully constructed arrogance crumbling. For centuries, they had manipulated the galaxy, secure in their belief that they were untouchable. Now, faced with the consequences of their actions, they were nothing more than frightened shadows of their former selves. You will stand trial, Aiden said, his tone brooking no argument. Your crimes will be laid bare for the galaxy to see, and when this is over, the Council will no longer be a tool for tyranny. And if we refuse? Myron asked, her voice trembling despite her defiance. Aiden's eyes hardened, the cold fire of 3 millennia burning within them. Then you'll learn what happens when humanity stops showing mercy. The trial was held on the newly designated capital world, Terra Nova, a planet reclaimed and transformed by humanity. Representatives from every council species gathered in the Great Hall, their voices hushed as the evidence was laid bare. The elders were unmasked for what they were: architects of genocide, manipulators of history, and betrayers of the very ideals they claimed to uphold. Footage from Earth's final moments played on massive holographic screens, the images seared into the memory of all who watched. Aiden stood before the assembly, his voice calm but unyielding. Humanity was not destroyed. We were scattered, forced to the edges of the galaxy, where we learned to survive, to adapt, to thrive, but we never forgot. He paused, his gaze sweeping the gathered species. We returned not for revenge, but to ensure that no species ever suffers what we endured. The Council must change, or it will fall. The hall erupted into murmurs, but the message was clear. The elders were sentenced to spend their remaining centuries rebuilding what they had destroyed, their power stripped, their influence shattered. As the trial concluded, Aiden stood on the observation deck of the Vindication, looking down at Terra Nova. Kira joined him, her expression softer now. "Do you think they'll change?" she asked. Aiden watched the newly unified galaxy below, the faint lights of ships moving in tandem. "They'll have to. Fear built the old council, but now, maybe, we can build something better." As the stars stretched out before them, Aiden's voice dropped to a whisper. "They tried to erase us. Instead, they gave us purpose." The Vindication turned, its engines humming as it sailed into the infinite black, a silent testament to what humanity had become. They were not conquerors. They were not destroyers. They were the children of Earth, and they had returned to claim their place among the stars.